Well, Letty Rising, welcome. Thank you for joining us so early. What time is it? Where are you
It is
and where are you?
it is 4 a.m. where I am, and I am in the East Coast of the United States in the state of North Carolina.
So what's your Montessori story? How did you discover Montessori?
Oh, how did I discover Montessori? Well, when I was in college, I somehow became really interested in non-traditional educational approaches. I was just hearing about different kinds of educational approaches, and I decided I wanted to just sort of take an independent study course on learning about different educational methods. And that took me to visit a Waldorf school, a Montessori school, something we call an open alternative school, which would be probably in the line of progressive school, like John Dewey based kind of a school. And so I observed, a lot of different environments, including a more traditional school. And I remember visiting the Montessori school and saying, wow, I am really impressed by what I'm seeing here. It feels like a system that is working in a way that the child is free, but yet there's some sort of structure around that freedom in a way that I couldn't really put my finger on. It was my first time seeing it. And I observed what we call often primary in the United States, but it was a 3 to 6 classroom. And then I went to a 6 to 12 classroom, elementary, and I just was very moved by it. And I'm like, oh, I think that I want to go into that. But I didn't get there then. I was 21. It was my senior year in college. I was married young. I had, my first daughter when I was 23, and I was sort of wrapped up in, homemaking and child rearing kinds of things for a couple of years. And then I decided, then I went through a divorce, and my whole life just sort of went through many things. And I'm like, okay, here's the time for me to jump into Montessori. And I went to get Montessori training, and I sort of jumped in after it had started. Because I got a job at a public Montessori school, which was one of the first public Montessori schools. I'm not good at remembering like how many years ago this or that happened, but I often reference to how old my younger daughter was at the time, and she just turned 24 yesterday, and I think she was just turning 3, so that would have been about 21 years ago.
Wow.
Going back. Yeah. And so I took my training. I had my first year at a brand new school, a brand new teacher, brand new team. I moved to Northern California.
With a toddler as well. Wow.
With a 2 and a 4-year-old.
Wow.
It was pretty crazy. And I was working for a woman who had never worked with elementary children. She was a classic 3 to 6 person, very comfortable with things being a certain way. And, I find that people who work with 6 to 12 are a little bit different than people who work with 3 to 6 sometimes. And I felt like she was a bit like hard on me, I guess you could say. And I felt like I was not a very good teacher. I'm like, I don't know if I understand this whole Montessori thing. I think I love it, but I don't feel good at this. It was my first year of teaching. I recently divorced in a new town, trying to figure out all the things. And long story short, I left teaching after that first year for a little while. And I'm like, you know what? I am going to go and work with homeschooling families for a little while. And I ended up I got my state credential, working with elementary children's parents and being a homeschool facilitator, which worked well for a few years. But then my own daughters were going to school. And I had since moved, and there were no Montessori schools in the area. And it was great for my older daughter went to traditional school for a year, and that was fine. But my younger daughter, it was like the light was out of her eyes. It was just, she wasn't thriving. And so I went to the principal of the independent study charter school that I worked for that served homeschooling families. And she was starting some brick and mortar schools. And I said, can I start a Montessori school? And she's all, well, create a proposal and pitch it to me and we'll see. And that proposal included me being the sort of teacher and the head of the school at the same time, which was a little crazy, but there was nobody else to do either of those things. So it was going to be me. And I had 1 year of teaching under my belt, and it wasn't the greatest of my experiences, I felt. But I did. She said yes. And so I started a school. I was the teacher, the head of school. And I found that I was actually quite good at it, actually. It's, your first year of teaching, often a lot of teachers leave if they don't have a lot of support after that first year, because Montessori education, I mean, we don't have what I would call a muscle memory for it, because we were taught in a different way, most of us. And so if you don't have somebody there supporting this new way of teaching, it can be challenging. And interestingly enough, I didn't have any support, but I also didn't have any sort of criticism or anybody looking over my shoulder. And so I didn't fear making mistakes as much. And so I just jumped in and I was like, oh my goodness, I can do this. And interestingly enough, somebody who was my sort of a mentor teacher at that school at the first year had moved down to Southern California, became and worked for me at this charter school as a teacher. And so she saw me in action and she's like, wow, like, your stuff, like, I don't know what you were thinking, how you were feeling about before. So that sort of grew my confidence. And anyway, I was a teaching head of school there for a couple of years, and then I stayed for a couple more years. And then I guess I won't go, I could tell, my story has many chapters, and so I'm going to try to make it briefer. I'm sorry, I'm going a long ways here. Anyway, I ended up just burning myself out, running a school, starting a school, dealing with all the things. And
the family as well.
Had 2 daughters, yes,
Oh, wow.
and they were, heavily involved in what I was doing. And so I decided to leave after 3 or 4 years, 4 years. I put my kids and my cats and my clothes in the car, drove across the country and took a sabbatical year at a Quaker retreat center with my daughters. And it was a beautiful year where I just sort of took some time, and I was like, do I want to keep doing this work? It was so demanding and exhausting. And I was like, you know what, I do. And at the time, my daughters were then 10 and 12, and my ex-husband happened to live not too far from where I was living. And he had started a new family and all that good stuff. And my daughters wanted to live with him, and because they wanted to get to know him more, because they had a little sister. And I was like, oh, well, I want to finish my Montessori training, because I hadn't actually finished my first training. And so I decided to enroll in a whole other Montessori training program, because that was a 6 to 9 program and this was a 6 to 12. So then I did that for a grueling year. And then long story short, I ended up being a Montessori administrator in, I want to say, 3 or 4 other schools after that. They were mostly public charter and Montessori schools, until I ended up going to LaPorte, where I met Mark, and I worked for 6 years. And I was mostly a head of school, because that's what people needed. And I found, I realized that was actually in some ways more of my niche than teaching, or I don't know if that's true. It's more like I found teaching, I was always worried if am I gonna do enough for the kids? Whereas as an administrator, I felt like I didn't feel the same, like, am I doing enough, as I did with teaching, where you always are like, oh, I could always be doing more, you know?
That
And,
was
but
such
I
a
was,
beautiful little school that you had there.
oh, it
It's
was a
like,
beautiful, beautiful little school. I do miss it sometimes very much.
yeah,
A very small 2-room schoolhouse. And that was
Spanish
beautiful after
architecture.
working for large schools that had, 6 or 8 classrooms or 10. So going down to a smaller school was lovely. And is a smaller school easier? I want to say yes and no, because, Mark, I know you also worked in a small school versus maybe larger. And when in a small school, if a problem happens, it's like under a magnascope under a magnifying glass or microscope, seen very much. The school doesn't absorb it as well as a large school. So it's like things are either going really well or it's tough. So anyway, while I was there, I ended up being ahead of school, but then I also found a little niche in going to schools that were having problems and like sort of supporting them. And I really enjoyed that. And then I, was there for a while. And again, LaPorte was acquired, the school I worked at, by another non-Montessori entity, and things were changing a lot. After 6 years of being there, I decided I wanted to start my own business, because people were asking me to do like some consulting and speaking and different kinds of things. And I'm like, I feel ready to do something different in the Montessori world. And that was very scary. But I took a leap, and I had a inexpensive option to live in a cabin in the mountains that I rented from my parents. And so I moved there and was excited about flying different places and supporting schools. And then the pandemic happened. And I was like, oh my goodness, like I'm gonna have to change my career probably, because I don't know, like, who's gonna need people going to schools? Are we even gonna be in the school again? Or are we gonna be perpetually at home? We didn't know what was happening. And then at the same time, in the United States, the real estate market was going like nothing was being sold or bought, and everybody was at home. And my dad panicked because he thought, oh, my house is like that I own is going to crash. I need to sell it right now. And I said, well, I want to buy it from you. And he was like, if you get the money in the next month, great. Otherwise, I'm going to sell it. And I'm all, I just need a couple more months. And he sold the house that I was living in. And at that time, all these people from Hollywood were coming up to the mountains, because I lived about 2 hours drive from, Los Angeles in the mountains. They were buying all these places, and there was nothing to rent. And so my daughter just graduated from college online during the pandemic. She was with me and her boyfriend, and I looked at her and I said, let's go to Mexico. And so I ended up going to Mexico. And during that time, I had like 10 or 20 people all over the world asking me for different help. I had to kind of turn away work because people needed so much help. And so at this present time, I'm doing like 5 different things. I guess I almost feel like I could do a little talk someday on like, what can you do besides being a teacher or a head of school? Because in Montessori, because I'm kind of doing different things, but I'm creating online courses and professional development courses for Trillium, which is a sort of online PD organization, professional development. I'm a teacher trainer for a MACD accredited program called the Prepared Montessorian in the United States for elementary or 6 to 12. So I started a Montessori homeschool charter school program with a virtual component in California that I was going to be the principal for, but I now decided that was right before the pandemic happened, and I decided to just be the consultant for that. And I have a principal who I help, who manages that, and I support her, which is perfect because I'm way too busy. I support my daughter, who started a online Montessori science program called Montessori Laboratory, where she is helping. They have lots of little videos of the Montessori physical science and geography lessons, and they create experiment kits, but they also have lists of all the different things you need for people who want to resource those themselves. And I also am working as a school consultant for a few different schools. I sort of function as what one would call a fractional education director, where schools that can't afford like an education director like full time, I just work like a few hours a week doing that. And so those are like some of the things that I'm doing. Oh, and I have a podcast and I'm writing articles. So
wow.
That's that for now. So I was telling Mark, I'm a little overextended at the moment, and going to kind of slow down a little bit, hopefully here finally, now that the pandemic is, crossing my fingers, getting behind us, slowing down a little bit after summer. So that's sort of the long
What an
story.
interesting story, Letty. But there are so many interesting things happening in the US, like Trillium, and you mentioned the Prepared Montessorian coming out of High Ground, which was a product, I guess, of LaPorte schools. And it's hard to tell from here, but it seems like Montessori is really going gangbusters in the US.
It is, it has been growing for a little while, but it really did hit a tipping point, I would say, in the last few years. It's, more kind of very innovative things are happening in the United States related to schooling in general, and Montessori schools. So, we used to have like our brick and mortar Montessori schools, which was strange enough, right? Because, this compared to traditional school, but now we have these brick and mortar Montessori schools. We have homeschooling Montessori. We have pods of Montessori, like we're small little groups of like families, or like a teacher leading a small group of them. We have virtual schools and online. I mean, it's kind of like pick your thing and it's there, or you can create it if it's not. So people are dissatisfied with education in the United States. We also have a challenge. It's funny, Mark was asked me sent some sort of questions to reflect on before our conversation. And one of them was something about like concerns or things that we worry about. And one of them is, I'm like, oh, I'm talking to a group of Australians who don't have to worry about one of our very obvious concerns in the United States is the gun violence that we have. And so as a result, like, this homeschooling program that I started, some of it had to do with people not being afraid to come back because vaccinations weren't ready or they weren't comfortable with vaccinations. So we had a schism of interesting people in that group of like, people not comfortable with vaccination versus people who are very comfortable but not comfortable going back to school because of exposures. And now there's people who are like, I'm afraid to send my children to school. So from all of these weird things happening in the world and in the US has a lot of different innovations coming out to address these different challenges.
It's what I loved about living in the United States was that entrepreneurial spirit, the ability to reinvent itself and the freedom to be able to do that.
It's funny. I have a friend who in Australia, Helen Greenwood. I don't know if anybody knows Helen, who she lives in Sydney, and she works at a school. But she said, we're just in Australia, we don't necessarily think the same way that the people in the US do. We don't like see all these 20 million different possibilities as always. We kind of see like the ones we know. That's her experience anyway. I don't know if that's necessarily true for everybody, but she was always like, oh, how interesting that all of these things are popping up. So, and I mean, it's, it's random for a lot of us here too, when we see these different ideas coming up and are they going to work? And are they going to, it doesn't mean it's going to remain faithful to the Montessori philosophy, and what does it mean to be faithful to the Montessori philosophy?
You're probably known by many people in Australia through your work with Trillium, and Trillium, I think, is probably is it a product of the pandemic more than I think it kind of took off during the pandemic, but it's such an American phenomenon. Can you say more about Trillium and what it's
Well,
doing for
yeah.
Montessori?
So Trillium was started by Simi Abdullah, who actually, funny enough, Mark, she lives 30 minutes away from where I currently live. So
No.
that has been a lovely thing because
Right.
anyway, she started Trillium. Well, she had her own school, and then she started sort of a website with a blog, and then she started creating printables for teachers, mostly 3 to 6 trained teachers. And it sort of grew organically of, creating professional development opportunities for teachers. So she started that in 2013, and it was kind of humming along and growing, but it definitely hit a tipping point. She reached out to me in 2018 or 19. It was actually 2019. It was the summer of 2019 that I created a boot camp. It was sort of a starting the beginning of the year, getting ready for the beginning of the year for elementary teachers. And she created a 3 to 6 version that was doing really well. And she asked me, well, will you do an elementary one? I said, sure. And she said, well, look at my 3 to 6 ones, and can you do something kind of similar? And hers was a lot about like shelves and placement of material on the shelves and things like that. And I said, elementary teachers need something a little bit different. They want to know, should we or shouldn't we be doing homework, or what kinds of work journals should we be using? And, they need to know more about conflict resolution and things that are more operational aspects in the classroom than like placement of things on the shelf. That's like a much smaller fish to fry for us than like the other kinds of things. And so she's like, okay, well, let's call it like a classroom planning boot camp. And so I created that, and it's sort of like 3 weeks worth of pre-recorded videos where I talk about a variety of different things that have to do with conferencing with the elementary child, planning and record keeping, how to get your first days and your first weeks going, and things like that. And so
It's so thorough.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah, I've done it. I loved it. I got a lot out of it. I trained 28 years ago, but I love your weekly, or is it bi-monthly articles that come out? They're so different. They're different to anything that you would get in training, and cover things that are really important for teachers to think about, but are not often like explicitly addressed in training programs. So I really enjoy those.
Yeah, I've tried to, I'm not here to replicate a training program necessarily. Like when I did that, I tried to think about like, what kinds of things did I either not get in my training, or maybe it wasn't as strong in my training, because, training is very comprehensive, but we only have like a certain amount of time. Like otherwise everybody would be in training for 3 or 4 years. And so, ongoing professional development is so important for Montessori teachers, particularly again, because we don't have that muscle memory of like knowing how to do this, because we learned from a traditional model, most of us. So if we don't continually revisit like what we're doing with fresh eyes, then we can easily fall back into a traditional way of teaching without even knowing it. And so anyway, I tried to get that going. And so I started the boot camp in 2019. I literally spent I'm a bit of a last minute person, and me was like, oh, just whenever you do it, and I'm like, oh, I hope she's not mad at me. But I was in Vietnam doing some professional development. I had flown there. I was so busy. I was still working at LaPorte, and I'm like, I don't know when I'm going to find time to do this. And so I recorded I spent like 2 weeks just like recording a ton of stuff. And then I turned it in. I'm like, that's that. And so it was that was sort of the, beta testing year. But then the next year was like the pandemic hit, and I was actually at a Montessori conference, and I had flown there in March, and they said it was still going to happen, and I flew there. It was to Dallas, Texas, in the United States, and I was flying on the plane, and when I touched down, I learned that Tom Hanks, famous actress, just came down with COVID, and that our president had closed the borders to Europe. And I was like, oh my gosh. So we got to the conference and it was canceled, like when we got there. And I'm telling you, there were so many vendors of Montessori materials who they were crying. It was a devastating, because many of them, that's, how they make their livelihood, is these conferences. It was a large AMS conference that I was going to for the American Montessori Society. And so I was there with Simi, who owns Trillium, and a few other friends. And she said, well, maybe we should be productive. We were in an Airbnb, and we wrote a book called on the coronavirus, like doing the, supporting parents during the coronavirus. And, or I think it was the Coronavirus Survival Handbook, and it was free. We put it out it's still on Amazon, but I think you have to like pay $5 or $10 for it or something. But it's, it's sold like gangbusters. So that was we felt good to be productive and just like, let's offer something to people. And that was great. And then, yeah, definitely online stuff just all of a sudden really went gangbusters. And so for sure, there was more want for online professional development at that time. And now a lot of teachers and educators have realized that, as much as Montessori is a hands-on thing, and we really like that, professional development often can be done pre-recorded or virtually, and it's a lot cheaper than, flying somebody somewhere to speak or whatnot. And so I do think that parts of what we had are here to stay in all of the countries, because it's financially makes more sense, and you can also get a broader perspective of people from all over talking about different things. Mark, you might not even thought to call me or call somebody in the United States for your talk if it hadn't been for like everybody just doing that these days.
Yeah. Now you're also involved with training with Higher Ground, and Higher Ground is doing some really exciting things. Do you want to talk? Can you talk a little bit about what they're doing?
Well, they are going really gangbusters. I mean, they have a whole different interesting model. So I work with them part-time, and I started, I actually wasn't planning on being a teacher trainer with them. When I came to work with them, I was working for the charter school, the public charter school with the homeschooling program. And I went to the CEO and said, can we use your digital album? They created sort of a digital bank of lessons where teachers were demonstrating all of the lessons online and for children. And I said, can we buy that and buy, for the homeschool program? And he's like, oh, wow, that sounds great. So we started the school partner program. But then I quickly realized this is a very much of a Ray thing, because then Mark would probably know that the album was not built out when I bought it. It was like maybe like 30% done. And I said, oh my gosh, you guys, I have this program. These teachers need these lessons, and like it's not all the way done. And they said, well, will you come and help us like film some? And I said, sure. So I ended up creating sort of a writing curriculum with them and I was filming writing lessons, but then many people were doing the traditional math and language, history, science, cosmic education. And so they did that. And then at that time, my friend Helen was working at Higher Ground, who's in Australia, and she had moved back to Australia, and the time difference was very challenging for her. So she left and she's back at a school there. And then they said, well, will you work in the training program? And I said, okay, I'll do that. So then I ended up going there. But they just opened their 100th school. And I'm not kidding you when I say that they just started opening schools, 5 years ago, 6 years ago. So they have a lot of sort of investor backing behind them. And so all of their schools are private schools, mostly 3 to 6, but they have elementary, and they also have a high school program that they've started that's sort of an offshoot. So they were doing some more digital related things during the pandemic, but they have since really doubled down and focused on their brick and mortar campuses, because I think their investors were wanting to see some good results there. And you can't be all things to all people at once. And so sometimes you need to kind of take a step back and really focus on the area you can be most successful. Even when you're running a school and you have many problems, or you have many challenges, or many things to look at, you have to look at them, tackle them one at a time to be really successful. Otherwise, you're sort of throwing spaghetti against a wall and seeing what's going to stick. So,
now for people who don't know here, High Ground is a big for-profit Montessori chain of schools, and it came out of the same people who ran LaPorte schools where you and I met. And then it's grown. I think when I was at LaPorte, they had maybe 20 schools at the height of it. And I thought that was a huge change.
Yes.
But then they've just grown. And because they're so big, they have their own training program. And so how are they doing that differently? What do they do that's unique about their training?
Well, I'm just going to have to say, like, it is a pretty amazing training program. And I think it's, it's probably one of the better ones I've ever seen in so many ways, because, so they come on every other Thursday. We have a cohort that meets. And so during the time we're not meeting, they are watching video lessons of like impeccable Montessori lessons. So like a trainer who's giving the lesson, and they've been modified ad nauseum to perfection. And so what's really lovely is when I took my training, both times, if I was absent during a day when something was presented, I didn't see it presented, but they can watch the video over and over again. And that's lovely. So I actually think that that's a good thing for Montessori education, is being able to see that lesson presented perfectly many times if you need to. And then one thing that I really love that we do differently is that when they need to record what we call evidence of practice videos. And so we will pick like 2 lessons every 2 weeks that they will need to video. And we kind of try to pick ones that are more key lessons that encapsulate a certain area. So they have to video themselves, and then they turn it into us. And we watch the videos and we give them feedback on their presentations. A lot of them work with children when they do the videoing. And so we can also talk about like their adult-child interactions, which is lovely. I love it when we do that. And then when we meet during our cohort meeting, I will pick one that I've watched, or my partner Nicole has watched, and we will show everybody that, and they will all give feedback, like glows and grows. And it's a very fast way for improvement to happen. Whereas, in my trainings, I would practice in the practice room at the end of the day. But I didn't have people kind of evaluating my lesson. And when I say evaluating, we're very kind evaluators, but we give feedback. And, it's positive things we see, but also like, your tone and your pacing could be a little bit faster or slower. you know, or the, you know,
Right.
the
What a
way,
great
the
use of
way
technology.
I think it's an amazing use of
Mhm.
technology. Traditional schools in the United States are using it a little bit too for professional development for teachers for their growth, but they're getting this real time in the training program. So I think that that's like the most, it's amazing to me because I've been working with the training program for 2 years. And so I have had a new cohort come in recently, and it's kind of like having a new group of children when you're teaching. And I'm like, oh my gosh, like all of these people are doing these things in the videos that the other group
Mhm.
isn't doing anymore, because
Mhm.
I've been able to tell them along the way, like, gosh, like what's a good example? Like sometimes they are, presenting like in a very quiet way, or they, need to be more animated, or they're maybe forgetting to write down like words on labels as they're labeling,
Mhm.
do a geometry lesson or something of the parts of the angle, and they, little things like, that you see, and then then they're not doing those things after a while, and you're like,
Mhm.
oh, they most of the times the mistakes later on are usually in the math area, and it's like a
Mhm.
procedural like thing that they, didn't understand how to exchange correctly, and so they actually, like, the whole lesson was off or something,
Now,
so.
is there a face-to-face component as well with so many different schools in?
Well, with the training program, we meet every other Thursday for an hour and a half. And so that's when we talk through, like, we call them chapters of work. Like, we've recently just, we did a bunch of math and then biology very recently, and
Mm,
the function and parts of the
yeah.
roots of the seed, and et cetera, et cetera.
So the
Uh,
face-to-face component is all video, or is there a live face-to-face?
So there is a live component, or there's supposed to be a live component in the summer, a 2-week residency where everybody flies to Southern California for now. They will have other places they're going to be doing this eventually, like, but MACT, which is the accrediting body for Montessori programs in the United States, requires a 2-week in residency program, because we do want them to make sure they're supposed to have the materials where they're at, obviously, but we want to be there in real time and supporting them, and we have to be. However,
Mm,
because of the pandemic, like everybody was online. I mean,
mm.
I even had an AMI trainer reach out to me asking me if I had materials, because he happened to live not too far from me, and he was videoing all of his stuff, and uh,
I read somewhere that High Ground is pioneering the use of virtual reality technology so that you can put on the goggles and walk around the classroom and
well,
you
you put
know.
on the goggles, but you don't walk around the classroom. Actually, it's the goggles help prevent you from walking around the classroom, so you get to walk around virtually but not like walking around. So
Yeah.
they do that, that's in the programs team, or the program development, and I'm sort of in the training. So
Mm,
I haven't done that, but I know people are doing that, and able to kind of watch classrooms from these virtual reality goggles, which is pretty interesting.
mm,
Back to, though, the training situation is that the cohort that's with us now, we have this summer, we are still going to be online, but the next summer they need to come, and that's going to be very interesting. We actually have some people from Vietnam who are in our program.
mm,
They're not going to have to fly to us, though, because they started the 2 year during the whole pandemic time, and they had a really tough time there. They didn't even have access to their materials because their country was very strict about lockdown, and they weren't allowed to go to their school, get in the car, do anything. So
mm.
those teachers, a lot of them used virtual tools when they were presenting, which isn't ideal, and it's not going to be how we're going to do it always in the future. But It was there when we
Yeah.
needed it. We have people from Africa calling in. We have people from South America,
Wow.
who are in the course. I don't think that because of the crazy time zones difference and because of needing to fly to California after this summer, I think it's going to be mostly people from the United States who are in that program. But there was a little window of time when people could sign up, and it was get their MACD certification because of the pandemic. And crossing our fingers, we won't
Yeah.
have to do that anymore, because I know it's been a worldwide challenge.
Yeah. Now, do you think Montessori is becoming more widely accepted in the United States? Is it a known entity would you say generally in the
It's a
public?
known entity, but a lot of people still have a lot of misconceptions of what it is, and they're very confused about it. It's funny, I was talking to the superintendent of the school that has the homeschooling program, and the woman was, the superintendent said, "Let's face it, Letty, the Montessori materials, they're odd." That's how she said, they're odd. People don't understand them. And so, there is a lot of sort of, needing to break through what that is. And we also have very, traditional approaches that are, kind of like not in concert with that.
Yeah.
But I find, creating a bridge is sort of like talking about what best teaching practices are. And Montessori best teaching practices are really in alignment with universal best teaching practices a lot of the time. We may have the what is the same, it's the how that's a little bit different.
Yeah.
So,
What do
so
you
there is
think are
that.
some of the what do you think are the biggest challenges faced by Montessori in the United States?
Well, some of the biggest challenges have to do with resources. Montessori materials are expensive, so public education sometimes struggles with that. And finding trained teachers, and even if we have more training centers, quite honestly, people are fleeing the teaching profession. And I heard from some of my Australian friends that there are people leaving there as well,
Oh yeah.
just because it was, it's been really a challenging couple of years, and people are tired and they're exhausted. So,
It's
the
impossible to
challenge.
find teachers right now in Australia. There are
Oh,
Montessori schools here that have no trained Montessori teachers. It's really a big crisis.
I mean, it's a crisis even finding a regular traditional
Mm.
teacher at some schools right now. So, I mean, I was just last night, I must have had like 10 people come to me this last week, practically grabbing my collar and, grabbing me by the throat and pulling me through the screen, saying,
Yeah.
"Please, do you know a Montessori teacher?
Yeah.
Please." And I had somebody begging me to come teach in Prague, Mirka, who runs the Montessori Institute in Prague. She's like, "Will you please come? Our teacher quit at the last minute." I'm like, I would love to come to Prague, but my life is not set up to do that, so I cannot. But I would love to otherwise. So we need to find more people who want to join this profession. And so they're really, I think we need to find people younger in some ways, and find people who are interested in this kind of teaching. And this is true in all countries. And really kind of nurture them and grow them up and have enough support systems in place so they can feel successful about
Mm.
what they're doing. So yeah.
Why do you think Montessori is not more widely accepted in the world? Like, I don't know what the figures are in the United States now, but in Australia, Montessori, my back of the napkin figures are that Montessori serves 0.12% of children here, and 0.5% of schools are Montessori schools. I think for centers, it's about 1.5–2% perhaps, which is better, but not by much. And I know it's a lot probably bigger in the United States, but probably, is it double digits yet? Do you think the number of schools that are Montessori?
double digit percentage wise, or
Yeah.
you mean?
Yes.
I don't know that I would say that, but I think
Yeah.
it's definitely a higher single digit than it would be there.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. So
I
I
mean,
mean,
somebody
this is,
was there's a Montessori census, and they're not accurate necessarily, but we definitely are into the thousands of schools,
yeah.
Montessori schools. If not, yeah, there's definitely, we're in the thousands.
Yeah, but there's something like 140,000 schools in the United States, I think,
Yeah,
something like that. So
yeah, we're not
why
in the
do you think?
millions yet, though.
Yeah. So after 115 years of Montessori, why do you think? I mean, this is not the number of schools that we need to do Dr. Montessori's vision of social change and social reform through, from within
Mhm.
by educating a child. Why aren't we there? What's holding us back?
I think there are a few things. One is the resource issue I mentioned a minute ago. One of it is I'm thinking of an example of, in the United States, I recently read there was like research saying that high school students would benefit from a later start of the day because of the way their rhythms are. And so there's been ample research that shows this, but schools are not starting at that later time still. And so we do lots of research, but change happens very slowly.
Mm.
There's that piece. Part of it is also Montessori is not as quickly scalable. Like if you have a bunch of scripted textbooks and you have a teacher, you can just sort of throw them in. Working with this big school district with this homeschooling program with a virtual component. I'm like, we need to hire a teacher for next year. We need to hire a teacher for next year. Luckily, I'm connected to this training center where they're going to have to find somebody awesome and throw them in the training center, and they're going to not have all of their training, but they're at least going to be on their way because of all the bureaucracy, like it takes and here we are in June and they're just now starting to interview people for starting in August. I'm like, you guys, if we are hiring Montessori teachers, we have to plan quite a bit more ahead for that.
Yeah.
But so
But
the
you were talking
scalability
about,
is
yeah,
challenging.
but doesn't the higher ground experiment prove that Montessori is scalable? They've opened
Yes.
100 schools in what, 5 years?
Yes, they are a private school and they're able to move faster. Our public school systems are a nonprofit. People get very entrenched into tradition and doing things a certain way. And here's the other reason, though, too, Mark, is that I'm guessing you might even have a few more 3 to 6 environments in Australia than you do elementary, but maybe
Yeah.
not. In the United States, we have more because parents see that as, oh, the kids are really getting a head start with this, doing things at a high level when they're 4 or 5 years old that they wouldn't be getting in a play-based preschool. However, in elementary, it almost attracts a different group of people because, we're giving the children so much choice, and people don't want to give 6 to 12 age children choice because they're afraid, what if my child falls behind?
Yeah.
What if they, aren't going to make it into like college? So like my daughters went to Montessori and my older daughter went to UCLA, which is a pretty, well-known school, even in other countries. And I tell parents that and they go, oh, okay. And it's so funny because like all they have to do is say, my daughter did this and she went to UCLA. And not to say that your child's going to do that too, but I have exuded a feeling of confidence of like, yes, this works. But it takes like trust. It also takes like lots of parent education and evidence. And so like that takes a lot of time, and you need to have staffing to reach out to parents and do outreach. Because in some ways parents advocate for these changes to happen. Higher Ground has grown quickly because they've had parents putting down deposits for their new schools, willing to pay for something that they haven't even seen open yet.
Do you think it's got to do with the profit motive? I mean, for Laporte, Higher Ground is very much a profit-making company, whereas in Australia, to get to run a school, you really have to be a non-profit, because a lot of the funding for schools in Australia is provided by the government, and you can't get government funding and if you're a private school. Whereas Montessori in the early childhood sector is really expanding much more rapidly here, where profit is allowed. So most of the Montessori centers are growing rapidly for profit here.
Well,
Do you think that has something to do?
Higher Ground is not the only game in town around here. We have the Wildflower schools, and those are nonprofit schools, and it's a network. They're not growing as fast, and they have a different model. And then this is again an unfair one to mention, but the Bezos Academy from Jeff Bezos, it's actually a nonprofit organization, but it is it has a lot of financial backing. So, but they are run as a nonprofit. So,
who of course owns Amazon, so it's got
that. It's true. It's true. But they're still not growing as fast as Higher Ground is either, because they have a bit of a different process, and they're moving a little more slowly and thoughtfully about it. So, and the thing about growing so quickly, like they're still in their early stages at Higher Ground, and some of their schools are doing really well, and some of them are in challenging places, and they don't have the teachers they need, and they're not starting with trained teachers at all of their campuses because they don't have that.
Yeah.
Oh, excuse me, I'm gonna sneeze. Yeah. Maybe not.
Does anybody else have a question they'd like to ask Letty? I feel like I always hog the interviews, but if any participant would like to ask, speak up.
I had a question, Letty. Right at the beginning, you talked about that first year that you did at the school, and you mentioned support and how important it is, and even later as you were speaking, you mentioned support. So what would you see that support could look like at best, or does look like at best?
Well, at best there is like in some sort of a person who's like an education director who's on site and who's not micromanaging the new teacher, because this is a challenging thing too, because teachers want the freedom to be able to implement their training. But so it's sort of like, a person who's either the head of school or education director needs to function kind of like you would as a teacher in the classroom, in the sense that freedom within responsibility. And so if a teacher needs extra support, that means like modeling, front loading, like, oh, I'm going to model a lesson in your class, since you're, all of our new teachers, I'm going to pop in and I'm going to model a lesson, and you're going to observe and take notes and ask questions. And then, you'll model a lesson, and I will observe and take notes and ask questions. We'll observe each other, like different people can go into different classes. You will go and observe in a classroom where there's a strong teacher and have that opportunity. So part of it has to do with that. And also having sort of systems and tools in place of like, how are you keeping your records? And again, I don't necessarily think that schools should roll out how teachers keep their records. I do think it's more of an individual thing, because we all have our style. But offering different options of like, how are you keeping your records? And, it's kind of like, again, the what is non-negotiable. You need to keep your records, but the how is something that is negotiable. Like, how are you doing that? Keep checking in weekly with new teachers, and being responsive. Like, what do you need most where do you feel like you're struggling? Where do you feel like you're doing well? Setting it up as this is a laboratory of growth for all of us. And I'm a head of school or an education director, and I'm growing too. And so we are going to be a place of continuous growth. So if you feel like that your training was the end, no, it was just the beginning. And really getting your teachers around the mindset of like having that open mind to continuous growth. I guess there could be probably a lot more to say about that, but that's sort of my initial thoughts there.
Thank you, Letty.
Kat asks, what are your thoughts on how the traditional Montessori environment can or does work with neurodiversity, strengths or weaknesses?
I think, well, gosh, there's so many ways to be neurodiverse. And I think that Montessori is beautiful for most and many, if not all, children. I think that the only people it doesn't always work for are children who have what we call in the United States like oppositional defiance disorder, like a true disorder where there are I worked at a school in San Francisco where children were had this diagnosis, and they were taking glass on shelves and throwing them against the wall and shattering it everywhere. And so, children who have that going on, it's creating a lack of safety for everybody else in the environment. So I think that there are more different things that need to happen there. But in terms of like children who have dyslexia, children who have ADHD, I think that a Montessori environment can support that very much. Now, like something like ADHD, like there's a lot of weak executive functioning for those children, like following 2-step directions, 3-step directions, and so on. I think that Montessori teachers need to have more freedom to be creative and know that they can individualize plans for children, because our ideal is that the children are choosing their work. We give them lessons and they're doing some sort of follow-up work to those lessons, but they're also choosing independent work and they are managing their time. But not every children can do that. And I've seen environments where it's like, well, here's your work journal, have a go at it. And there's like, some kids can do that great. And some are like, it's like throwing them into a rushing river without a life preserve. So, when
Letty,
I was,
What advice would you have for a new or inexperienced teacher? Just to close on that, maybe.
Oh, okay. A new or inexperienced teacher. I would tell them to be open-minded, to listen to their colleagues and take their information, but also don't be afraid to try something a little bit new, like be responsive to the child. You need to be a strong teacher is to be a responsive teacher. And so that means that you may have 90% of your children can be handed a work journal and they can write down their lessons and what they're doing. You might have one kid who needs a plan, and you sit down with them and say, okay, you can choose what order you're doing it, but let's sit down and make a plan together, and then you'll be doing that. So being responsive to the child in front of you, rather than thinking, oh, my training taught me this, so I need to do it this way, even though it's not working for the child. Of course you're going to maybe try something a few times, but if you're doing something over and over and it's because your training said so, but that it's clearly not working for the child, you need to be like Maria Montessori and be that experimenter and stop and go, okay, I need to try something new, and let me keep trying until something works. Like, I'm going to continue refining my experiment, observing, applying, executing. Did it work? Did it not work? Okay, now I'm going to try something again. So That I
That's
think
great,
is
great advice. Yeah. Letty, it's always so fun and interesting chatting with you, and we could go on for
Yeah,
hours and hours, I'm sure.
we certainly
But
could. We certainly
we should
could.
probably, where can people sign up to hear your wisdom on a regular basis and read your podcasts, listen to your podcasts and read your
I
articles?
do have a podcast that is at Trillium Montessori. It's attached to that platform. And also I have blogs or articles that I write. Like, I think that if you sign up for the mailing list, you get like a little articles. Pretty much the articles are me reading my podcast is my articles and vice versa. I kind of riff off of my article. And interestingly enough, you know, the podcast is a new thing because people like to be reached in so many different ways. And now we're realizing people like to read. Some people like to read, some people like to listen in the car. So you can find me there. So I'm sure that maybe, I don't have the link at this moment, but Mark, you might be able to pass it along to somebody. Yeah, Trillium Montessori. I think it's
.org, I think.
I think it's
.org.
Yeah, it's .org. Yes, trilliummontessori.org. Here, I'm just gonna
or is it courses.trilliummontessori?
No, I'm gonna actually put it in the chat right now because I just pulled it up. Okay, and it'll take you directly to the podcast. You might need to like put your email in to get it or something, because then you'll get newsletters about when a new episode comes out. But that's where it is. And so I just
thank you so much for getting up in the middle of the night or early in the morning.
Just early in the morning. No, actually, it was very invigorating. It's just so fun to talk about Montessori. And if anybody ever has, you know, a question, I don't know if you would, but that's my email address. Very basic. I'm Letty Rising, lettyrising@gmail.com. And you can feel free to reach out if you have a question or something. So.
Well, I hope we get a chance to talk with you again sometime, or you know, if you're ever down this way, please let us know.
Well, I told my friend Helen I want to get to Sydney at least, hopefully in the next year, because she's coming all the way to Mexico to see me. So, but Mark, where are you at again in Australia?
Queensland, so Sunshine Coast, north of Brisbane.
That's right. Yes. Yeah. Okay. I would love to make it up there too at some point. And I just love visiting Montessori schools and seeing how they are.
Much nicer area than Sydney. You don't want to go to Sydney.
Here we go.
Well, yeah, I think we disagree with you.
None of this rivalry now. Come on.
It's not hard in Australia. We've only got like 3 or 4 big cities, so you know, there's a lot of rivalry.
I know. Yeah. Well, thank you all for joining us today.
Thank you, Letty.
Yeah, thank you, Letty. It was lovely. Lovely to meet you.
Bye, everybody. Thanks for coming.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.
See you another time.
Bye. Bye.